All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our Google Suite series. We'll be covering Google Sheets today, and our program will be using a lot of examples that relate to business. But of course, all of the material we cover today can easily be applied to any other purpose that you might have for using Google Sheets. My name is Meredith. I am a librarian with the Plano Public Library. And we've got Matthew as our chat moderator today. He's also a Plano Public Library staff member. So just so you know, no mics will be on throughout the entirety of the program. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and Matthew will answer directly or share them with me throughout the program. If you want to watch this again, we are, of course, sending up a follow-up email after the program, a few days, business days afterwards, with a recording of the program so that if you wanted to practice again, cover a part that maybe you wanted to see again, you'll have access to that. So what you're going to need for this program today, especially if you're wanting to follow along, is a Google account. So if you already have a Gmail, you're set. If you haven't got one yet, you can go to google.com and they'll have a sign up option available and you can get started that way. We are covering some slightly more advanced topics than just the basics. So having a general knowledge of how to navigate Google Sheets and use some of the basic stuff, know the basic terminology like cells and functions and formulas will come in handy. If you are wanting to follow along, you've got three options, I would say. If you have one screen, you can do a split screen setup where you can look at the Zoom screen and your Google Sheets. Or if you have two monitors, that's probably the easiest way to do it. Or, of course, you can have a mobile device running your Zoom like a tablet and then working on the computer itself. So we will also have a practice sheet available. Matthew will be putting that in the chat. It looks like, let me pull it up here so you can see it. This right here, it's our Google Drive, and you'll want the practice sheet, which is right here. It has instructions on how to save it to your own Google Drive so that you can use it for the program. All righty, let me close that out. There we go. So today's learning objectives, we're going to cover some use of some basic templates, what they look like in Google Sheets, and how to use them. We'll cover a setup of data ranges into tables because it's a little different than you may be used to if you've used Excel before. I'll share a few advanced functions and how they can be utilized. And then we'll also cover some formatting and charts that can be effective in presenting your data. So let's go ahead and get started. So first we'll look at templates. So to do that, we're going to come over here to our Sheets Home button up at the top there. Click on that. And you'll notice up here at the top, you have a place that is set up for starting a new spreadsheet. And it gives you a few samples of templates, usually most recently used ones that you might have clicked on. If you want to see all of the template options, you click on Template Gallery right here, and it'll open up the options. Now, Google does not have as nearly an extensive collection of templates as Excel does. It's just from, not being around nearly as long. But I'll show you a couple just so you can see what kind they have available. Of course, we've got, personal stuff with like to-do lists and calendars and that sort of thing. Work-related stuff, and this is where the business ones kind of tie in. And then project managing as well, if you're big into keeping track of big projects that you're working on and some education-related ones. So let's have a look at first our financial statement one here. So we're going to click on it, and it'll make a new template for us to work from. Most of the templates that I've seen on here have very clear instructions that are available. And if you want to keep the instructions as a separate spreadsheet right here, you can always delete that once you're comfortable using it, or you can keep it there in case you need to refer to how to use the template. So this one covers basic financial statements for a business. So you have an area for your transactions, and it has examples that you can look at before you start using it yourself with drop-down options. There's also a dashboard to keep track of the financial statements that you're working with. So your sales, profits versus losses, your highest sales months. And this stuff right here is all protected. It has a little padlock right there, which means basically the creator of this template wanted to make sure that you were less likely to change anything on this sheet because it does all of the calculations for you. So if you ever tried to change anything on here, let's say we wanted to try changing something in this area here, and we did some random text in there. When you hit enter, it has a pop-up that lets you know you're trying to edit part of a sheet that shouldn't be changed accidentally. And it gives you an option of allowing you to change it if you want to. And if you're working in your own protected sheet, you may want to go ahead and say, don't show this again for 5 minutes if you're doing a lot of changes. But if it's something that you haven't created and you don't want to mess it up, hit cancel and it undoes your changes and you haven't messed anything up that way. So there's also a way to change categories. So in our transaction list here, they had a few custom ones that you could enter and change. And you can do that in the categories sheet over here. And you would literally just type in whatever your other expense is that you're wanting to work with. So you could say, promotional material maybe. And put that in there. And then when you come back to transactions and the drop down, you'll have promotional material show up. And so these are really nice because you don't have to do too much to change them. They're very functional. You could, of course, change the colors if you had color preferences that you wanted to change it to, or you wanted a different kind of font, you wanted the font bigger. You can always change that. But they're intended mostly to be left as is and utilized with the instructions. So we'll get rid of that one and go back to our Sheets homepage. And I'll show you one more. So we'll look at, let's do annual business budget. And this one was done by Intuit QuickBooks, a pretty well recognized name. So it tells you how to get started and use the template. It has a little place for you to enter your starting balance. And then it has places for you to enter your income and expenses. And then there's a summary page. Now, this one you'll notice it doesn't have the little lock on it. Instead, they just put a note that says, please don't edit this sheet. Now, if you're confident in the fact that whoever's using this sheet, if you share it with anyone, isn't going to edit it, you can just leave it at that, or you can, of course, protect it yourself. There's two ways to do that. You can come up here to Data and protect sheets and ranges, or you can just right-click on the sheet that you're wanting to protect and click Protect Sheet. And it'll give you an option to type any description in here, so any information that you're wanting to say why you're protecting it or something like that, you could do that. And then you can set permission. There is an option to protect the whole sheet except certain cells. And that would mean that, say you had an area where you wanted people to be able to put stuff in, but you didn't want them to change anything else, you could use that option to leave those cells available for alteration. And then you set the permission. And you can have it so that it does not allow anyone else to change it at all except yourself. You can pick other people to allow, or you can have it do the warning sign that we had from the previous template. And now you have a little padlock there showing you that your sheet is protected. Any questions about templates?
So far, no.
All righty, well then we'll just keep moving on. So now we'll get back to our practice sheet that we have. And there it is. Our first tab we'll look at is tables. So like I said earlier, unlike Excel, Sheets doesn't have a way to automatically turn a range into a table. So this range of data here, in Excel, you'd be able to do insert and table, and it would do all the things for you that you would want it to do. So we have a few steps that you can do to make it more table-like in Sheets. So making sure that you've got any cell within the data range highlighted. You don't have to highlight the whole thing, but if you are wanting to exclude any text that happens to be next to it, so let's say we didn't want the total sales to be a part of our table, then you would have to highlight what you wanted, because otherwise the program just assumes that anything that's touching is part of the table. So now we're going to format it and give it that familiar coloring that helps us tell that it's a table, where it's got the headers in a different color and alternating color lines for the information. Of course, we get a little pane over here to allow us to change different things. You can change the range if it didn't select the correct one. You can decide whether or not there's a header. So it defaults to header, but if it fails to default, you can always check it and put that header back up there. And then, of course, you can pick colors. It has a few default options, and you can get pretty colorful. Or you can always do a custom setting and change these yourself here. Pick from basically any color you want. They've got some pre-selected colors, or you could even go make your own. So let's see. So once we've got it set up, we can put done. And I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty here. Give me one moment to switch over and see if I can get this to work. And while I'm doing this, are there any questions I can answer?
None at the moment.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry for the technical problem here, everyone. I will be as quick as is possible. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then, okay, so we've switched over to a different set of headphones because the one I was working with was not behaving itself. So hopefully I will be able to hear Matthew if he's got any questions to share. And we'll carry on. Okay, thank you guys for your patience with that. So in addition to coloration, of course, there's some other features that other tables have like in Excel, and that would be the ability to filter, which is very handy if you're wanting to sort through your data. So when creating or adding filters, you can do individual columns, but it will only organize or filter that column and it won't affect the others. So you want to just, again, have any cell in the table selected, and then come over to data and create a filter. And you'll see these little upside down pyramids, which are our filters. And so we can sort it alphabetically, which would do numerical order if you did that for a number column like the months, or employees, you could sort them so that their names are in alphabetical order. And you notice that when I change it, the data follows the altered cells so that they all stay together. Very handy to have. Another missing feature from Google that we can override by doing an extra step is if you're using this whole table in a formula or a function, In Excel, it comes pre-named table 1 or table 2, depending on what table it is you've worked on. So for this one, we can create a named range that will allow us to do the exact same thing. So you'll come over to your data again and come down to named range. Make sure that it's highlighted correctly, and then you can name it whatever you want. So if you wanted to just name it the traditional table 1, done. You've now got this whole thing named, and you can use it in a formula instead of having to type out the entire range, which would look like that. So you can see it saves you a little bit of text typing, and it makes it easy for visual reference to the formula. All right, any questions on tables?
Nope, not at the moment. That seems to make sense.
All righty. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a lot more steps than you'd have to do if you were doing it in Excel, unfortunately. So we'll move on to some functions. So move on to our next tab here. And we've got a few set up areas that we're going to do some functions with. So our first one is going to be, oh, and I left this in here. Let's delete this out so that we have a blank slate to work with. There we go. So we have all of our employees here, but we'd like to be able to have a quick, easy reference instead of having to try to figure out by looking at the numbers who sold the most for the year. So there's a function called rank.eq. So we'll type that in here, equal sign to get our function started. And then rank, and you see there's a few options for rank. Now we're going to use the top rank of a specific value in the data set. The difference between rank EQ and rank AVG is this one will give you, like let's say you have somebody tied for first place. It will show them both as number 1 and then skip down to 3. Rank average will show you 1.5 for each of those and then go down to 3. Since we're wanting to keep it an easy numerical ranking, we're going to stick with the EQ. And beautiful thing about how Sheets works is as you're typing it, it shows you what part of the formula you're on. So we want to look at the value, and ours is a cell value. You could type in the value directly, but if say you ever found out that you needed to update numbers, picking the cell here would mean that it would automatically update the rate in rank and you wouldn't have to retype it. So we're going to select that cell, come back over here, do a comma to separate it, and we're comparing it to all of the other sales numbers in the total sales. So we will click and drag to get our full range there. So from N2 to N11. And then this right here, the true false statement is it ascending order? So we are wanting to go from number 1 to number 10, which is descending order. So that would be false. And then we close off our formula and hit enter. And we have rank number 3. Autofill is very handy, except sometimes, as you can see, it continues past the point that we actually want it to be because we don't want to look at all staff totals. So we're going to reject the suggestion, and instead we're going to use the little bullet there, the autofill bullet, and drag it down so that we get just the ones we want. I'm not sure why I'm getting so, oh, I know I'm getting so many of those numbers that are different. So what happens if you don't forget to make the range absolute is that each cell that you move down shifts the range down. So let me show you. You can see how the range has shifted down 1. Now it's shifted down another. So we need to make that range absolute. So let's undo and come back up here to our formula. And to do that, there's a really easy shortcut. You want to just hit the F4 button, and it puts these little $ signs in front of the numbers and the letters.
So the $ means absolute. It's not going to move at all. It's going to stay where it is. And you have to put one in front of each of the elements in the range so that it doesn't change either the column or the row. You can use F4 to cycle through your options. So you can see the $ moving and back to no $. But we want all 4 elements covered. And now, when we drag the autofill in, our range will stay where it's supposed to. See, it doesn't move. But the cell that we're referring to and ranking does change because it's not an absolute value. All right, any questions about that one?
No, I think we have a very savvy audience.
All right, awesome. Then we can move on to conditionals. So conditionals, there's a bunch of different types of them. The most simple one is the if formula, but we are going to look at some of the more complicated ones. So conditionals means if something meets a certain criteria, then something else will happen. So we're going to look at our conditionals for doing a conditional addition, so a sum function. So we're going to look for the top 3 sales, and we're going to add those together to have a total of our top 3 sales for the year. So we'll do our equal sign to get our function going here. And then we're going to do sum, and you'll see the suggestions here. A regular sum is just adding the series of numbers, but we want to make it conditional. So we're going to do sum if. And now we have our range that we're going to be looking through. And for us, that's going to be the ranks because it's easier to deal with the rank numbers than it is these big bulky numbers. So we're going to search for the top 3 in the ranks. So that's going to go from O2 to O11. And then we're going to add our criteria. So we need it to be the top 3. And there's 2 ways you can write that. You can either write it as less than or equal to 3, which is what I'm going to do. Or you can do less than 4, which will exclude 4 and only count 1, 2, and 3. Either way works. I guess if you're going for conservation of characters, then less than 4 is the least characters. But we're going to do less than or equal to 3. And you want to make sure to put those in quotations because otherwise it can confuse. There we go. All right, and then we're going to pick the range that will be corresponding to those and add them together. So we're going to look at our total sales here. Nope, make sure we get the right square. There we go. So we've got our total sales range, and then close it. And so it has added the first, second, and third total sales numbers to get us a total value there. All right. So we're going to do something slightly similar, but a little different. Instead of adding, we're going to count if a certain criteria is met. So we'll do equal and count. And this function, you'll see there's a bunch of different ways to count, but we're going to do the conditional one. It literally just counts the cells that meet the criteria, which is why it only has 2 different bits of information that we need. The range, which we will be, we're looking at months over 6,000 in sales. So we look at our total sales down here. We're going to highlight those all the way across. We don't want to include the total sales because that would, of course, be a lot of numbers that we don't need. And then we're going to set our criteria. So we want over 6,000. So we're going to do quote marks greater than, and then 6,000. There we go. Closing quote marks and close our bracket there. And we've got 4 months. Of course, we can visually confirm this by just looking. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, 4 months. This is, of course, really handy if you've got a lot more data than you're working with here, because, I mean, you could just manually count it. But if you've got a ton of information, then having something count for you, of course, always makes it easier. Any questions on the conditionals?
Nope, not at the moment.
Okay, so we're going to try another fun one. And this one I've had brought up a couple of times in both Google Sheets and Excel programs that I've taught. It's the ever infamous VLOOKUP. This is super handy for looking up certain criteria and then returning related data in the other columns. So like, let's say we wanted to, for our first one, we're going to do use a employee's name to look up their sales for January specifically. So we're going to put our employee name that we're looking up here, just so we have a quick and easy person to look up. We'll do Abdul, and then we'll type our formula down here, or our function. So start with, of course, the name of the function, which is VLOOKUP. And that's just short for vertical lookup. And so we have to put in our criteria that we're working with. So if you had a specific piece of information, then you could just put that straight in, but it's handy to use a cell because then you can change it and it'll continue to look up whatever you've typed into that cell. It gives you some functionality out of it. So we're going to do our R2 right there. Okay. And then we need our range that we're going to look at. So we're going to look at A2 over here, which includes the names because we have to be able to find the names first. And then we're going to include all the way over. Well, let's see if it behaves for me. Huh. Why is it misbehaving? Oh. It put R2 in a weird spot. Let's fix that. There we go. I confused it. There we go. Now it'll highlight our range for us. There we go. And we don't want to include total sales because we don't need it. We're just doing the months here. So make sure we've got A2 through M11. And then we want to look at the index. So the index is the column that we're looking through. So this is column 1, column 2, and so on. So we're looking for January, which would be column 2. And then the last part asks whether or not it's been put into a sorting. It's an optional one. You don't need it. So we're going to put false, because it's not been organized in any way, shape, or form. And now we have Abdul's January number right there. If you want to get a little more creative with it and be able to look up other stuff, but let me demo that we can do others as well. Ricky, you get Ricky with 329. If it's blank, you get a NA error. It just means that there's no value for it to look up, so it doesn't know what to bring back to you. So let's put Wanda up in here. And we're going to make our equation a little fancier because we're going to change and make variable the index so that we can look at the month. So we're going to type in the month using numbers because that way we can easily adjust our equation here to look it up by index. So since we've got January starting on the second one, anything from this cell here plus 1 should give us the correct month. So for example, 1 plus 1 would be 2, would get us January. 2 plus 1 would give us February, so on and so forth. So we're going to hit enter. And we don't have a month entered, so it automatically does the first one. it's returned Wanda. So let's look up October. So Wanda's sales number for October. Let's see, we got Wanda here. Highlight that so we can see it. And 669. And so you could change that to any month that you wanted to. You could do July and find that Wanda had a very bad month in July. So any questions on VLOOKUP?
No, it seems they understood.
Awesome. And our final one, we'll do Lickety Split quick so that we don't get too far behind. I find this one kind of handy, especially if you're doing any sort of international type work. Like if you're, for example, shipping stuff from the United States to a country that uses the metric system, and you need to know the total weight so that you can put it in kilograms for that postal service or what have you. There is a function that actually converts. So instead of having to look up the conversion on a separate website or use a tool for that, you can actually use a function for it. So the function is, of course, called convert. So we'll start out with the top one here. Do =, convert, and select it. And all of these functions come with a learn more option. Some of them you don't need to click on it because it's pretty straightforward. But convert comes in handy with the learn more because the different values, the units that are used, have a very specific text that refers to the specific units. And so if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll end up with not getting a result. I'll give you an example real quick on this one. You'd think that it would just be LB for pounds. So let's try that out and see how it works. So we're converting our value over here in C15 to from pounds. So use our quotation marks, pounds, from pounds to kilograms, kg. All right, and then we'll close it. And we've got an error. And that's because we used the wrong abbreviation. So we're going to come back in here. And you can click on the convert part to get the little drop down to show up again. And click learn more. And it'll load. And if we scroll down here under notes, it's got a list for a whole bunch of different units that you can use. So weight, distance, time. And you'll see pounds has LBM. So I'm pretty sure that's LB mass. So pounds mass. Not 100% sure why they use that, but that's what we have to use because that's the vocabulary for this particular function. So we're going to put that M in there. And now we have a conversion to kilograms. And our autofill actually works this time because we don't have any additional information. So we can just go ahead and click that checkbox. And now we've got all of our weights converted from pounds to kilograms. If you had a specific amount of decimal places required by, say, the company you're shipping with, they don't like decimal places and they want it to all be solid integers, you can get rid of your decimal places by coming up here to the decrease decimal places. And it will automatically round up and down as necessary to get you your whole numbers. So that is the conversion. And like I said, there's a lot of different options. You can do weight, distance, time, pressure, temperature, just you can go crazy with whatever you wanted to convert. Any questions on conversion?
Someone is asking, is regular Excel have this function that we're working on as well?
You know, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't pulled it up before in Excel. So I could check that maybe at the end of class if we've got some extra time. I could open up Excel and see if it's got something in there. I'm not 100% sure. I would be surprised if it didn't have it, but you never know. This could be a feature that Google happened to decide was important and Excel hasn't. So, but I will put a pin in that and see if we have enough time at the end of class today. Any other questions?
No, just that one.
Okay, well then we'll move on to conditional formatting. So conditional formatting is basically kind of similar to our conditional functions that we used. It uses set criteria, but instead of printing out results, it gives you various formatting, i.e. colors, fonts, stuff like that, that allow your items that you're looking for to stand out. Comes in very handy for highlighting numbers that you want to really be visible. So we're going to do a couple of examples. We're going to do a single color conditional formatting, and then we'll do a color scale. So first we're going to look at our average sales down here at the bottom. And we're going to color code them so that we can tell which ones are better than the average sales for the year and which ones are worse. Very straightforward. So we've highlighted our range that we want to work with, and we're going to come over here to format, and then down here to conditional formatting, right above our alternating colors. And we get a little pane that pops up here and make sure that our range is correct. Yes, that's good. And then we can select what we're going to do with our rules here. So you've got a whole bunch of different rules you can use. You can have it highlight stuff if it's empty. So you can check and see if you've missed a cell that is empty in a big set of data. You can look for specific text. You can also look for dates, all sorts of things. We're going to do greater than. And the value that we're working with is the average sales value here. So we're going to say greater than 540. And you'll see it's already colored it. I'm not a fan of this really pasty color, so I'm going to change that. I want something a little more vibrant. So I'm going to pick this green right here. That makes it stand out a little there. And I like the text to stand out a little more, so I'm going to also select white text so it's more visible against that darker color. You can also, of course, make it bold, italic. You can strike through it. You can do a few different things there. And when you're done, you hit done. And your rule is clearly visible right there. Now, if you click anywhere else, you don't see that rule. But when you click on a cell that's part of the conditional format rule, it will show you what all that rule is and how it applies. So these are all of our above average sales. And now we're going to do less than, just so we can really make it colorful. So I didn't highlight which ones I wanted to work with, so I have to correct my range because right now it's only one item. So we want to click on select data range here, and we can change that out for, let's see, we just want this one here. And we can move this out of the way so we can see and drag it across. And there we go. We've got B12 through M12. Okay. And now we want to do less than or equal to. And we're going to do that so that if, say, for some reason we got exactly 540, that one doesn't get left out because we want all the color. So we're going to make it 540. And we want it to be a nice big contrast. So we'll stick with red. And we'll also do white text again so that it's easier to read. And done. And so now we have a clear delineation between what was above average and what was below average. Any questions about conditional formatting so far?
Yes, someone is asking, can the reference be a cell instead of a value, i.e. use Q3 instead of 540?
Quite possibly. Let's find out, shall we? It's one of those things that I didn't test beforehand, but might work. So let's see, we want Q3. Let's give it a try. Let's see. Does not seem to work, unfortunately. Maybe if we do equal Q3. Yeah, nope, still doesn't work. That is unfortunate. Looks like the answer is no. Because it looks like, yeah, it's highlighting stuff that isn't part of it. There may be a workaround for that. I will have to look into that, but it isn't. It says formula, so in theory, it should be able to do that. I'm not sure why it's not doing that. Let's see. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. It may be that a specific formula is needed for that rather than just doing a cell reference. So that is a good question. We'll have to see. If you make changes that you want to undo, you can always hit cancel also. So all of those changes I did, gone. Any other questions?
So far, no. I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, that one we'll have to see about because I'm guessing there's a formula that you have to use specifically for cell reference, and I'm not sure what that one is. All right, so going back to our formulas, or not formulas, our conditional formatting. If you wanted to have a little more nuance, you didn't want it to just be, black and white, or in this case, red and green, you can instead do a color scale. So we're going to get rid of our rules here, and you can easily do that with the little trash can and get rid of those rules. And we're going to do a new one instead. So you have the single color option here, and that's the default, or you can come over to color scale. And here it has, of course, preset it up in kind of a single monochrome scale that you can use, or you can get a little more creative. So keeping it minimum value and maximum value is the best way to go because you'll get the most solid color on that value instead of, say, changing it to specifically 0. Because if you don't have anything that's close to 0, then it won't ever get to that darker color. It's a lot more contrasting to have the minimum and maximum values be the minimum point and the maximum point. And then in the middle, we can use 540, our middle number there. There we go. And let's spruce up the colors a little so it's a little more dynamic. We'll use that darker green we had before. And then let's use yellow. So we'll do kind of a traffic light look. And then red. And let's use a more vibrant yellow. There we go. So you can see that there is a gradient of color here. And the darkest red is the 674.4, yep. And then our most green is this sad little 294.2. And everything in between is a range. And of course, you can change your midpoint to adjust where those colors go. If you wanted to use a median number or something like that, you could do that. Or if you want to have a nice rounded number like 500, and you'll see it shifts the colors a little bit. Any questions about color scale?
No, not at the moment.
All right. So we'll go ahead and leave that there and move on to charts. So we'll try to cover these in the last 15 minutes here, hopefully Lickety Split. I have some pre-set up data that we'll work with for our charts. Charts are a great way to generate an easily interpreted visual for your entire set of data or a portion of it. So they're very handy, especially if you're doing presentations or you just want a quick reference to kind of where things are. So something you should know with charts, the best thing to do is go ahead and select the specific data sets that you want to refer to. So like in this situation, if we wanted to look at employees and their contributions by month, we could create a chart by just leaving the single cell highlighted, but it will automatically include portions that may not be relevant, like the average sales or the total sales. So it's always more helpful to just go ahead and highlight what you want. And then you do insert up here and chart. So unlike Excel, it doesn't let you pick specifically what you want right away. It does an automatic generated one, but then you can come over here to the chart editor pane and change it up. So let's move this a little so we can look at it. That's a lot of lines. So a line chart would not be the most beneficial. We are going to instead do a column chart. So stacked columns would probably be the best, because if we did side by side, you'd still have lots of information and it could get very confusing. So we're going to do a stacked chart. And as you see, we've got each person's contribution per month. So columns and bar charts are very similar. The only difference is basically which axis you're working on. So a bar chart does the same thing, just vertically instead of horizontally. Something to keep in mind. It's really what you prefer looking at it, or how it fits best in where you're trying to utilize it. So we're going to go back to our columns. There we go. All righty. So now we can get a little creative with it. You can, of course, adjust the size by using standard little squares at various spots to make it bigger. Or you can also make it its own separate sheet, which would make it very big and easy to read. If you wanted to do that, you come over here to the little dot, dot, dot corner, and you have all sorts of options. And so you can move to own sheet right here, and it adds a sheet down here. Of course, I've done this a couple of times, which is why it shows chart 4. But if this was your first time to move it, it would name it chart 1. And you could, of course, change the name there if you wanted to. So you could double click on it and name it total sales chart, so that it's easier to determine what it is that you're looking at. And now we can start messing with the various parts of it to get it to work better for us, because this is some small text here. That title doesn't work well. It's an auto-generated title, so it's not particularly useful. There's a few ways you can edit it. You can either click on Edit Chart to get the editor pane to pop up and come over to Customize, or you can double click on this particular part that you're wanting to edit, and then you can type it in directly. And before we get to customizing, just some final things to cover. If, say, your range is inaccurate, you can change it here. You can also remove different parts that you didn't want to include. So let's say you accidentally included the average numbers or the totals. You could easily remove them from here by clicking on the little dot, dot, dot and remove. And it would take that particular part out of the equation. You can also look at using column A as the headers. If you didn't have that checked, you would lose your headers there. And row 1, we're not actually using that for much, so it's not a big deal there. You could also switch them. So if for some reason you had the people listed and then the months, which I mean might be something you wanted to work with. Maybe you wanted to see how the months compared across people's sales. You can switch rows and columns so that they flip-flop for you. But we're interested in looking at the annual amounts, so we're going to keep it that way. So in the customizations, under charts and axis titles, you can change all of the different titles by just making sure that you've selected the correct dropdown. So for our title, say we wanted to name this total sales per month. And you can also change the font type. It auto adjusts it to maximize the space. But if you want it to be more legible, you can of course always make it bigger. Of course, bigger means that you're going to have less room for the rest of the chart. but you can definitely do that so that it stands out more. You can also do italics. You can change its alignment so it's in the middle. All sorts of different ways to tinker with that. You can change your horizontal axis title, which is the employees, to employee contribution, if that makes more sense to you. Again, you can change the size so it's more legible. And if we wanted to label what these numbers on the side were, of course, we'd want to do vertical axis and label that as, let's say, number of sales. Make it bigger as well so we can read it. So now we have a title there. You can also go into the different series here, which are the little sections representing each person. And you can apply to all series. So if you wanted to, say, create lines to make it a little clearer which parts are where, you can change the color to black. And you've got your lines visible there. You can also change the thickness. You can change how bold those colors are by the line opacity. And that will kind of make that stand out a little more. That's, of course, a personal preference. You can add some other stuff like data labels, which would put the exact numbers there. It makes it a little more crowded. So keep in mind, the more you add to your charts, the harder it can be to read it. So if you're wanting to just give a quick visual glance, it could be better to leave that data off of there. You can also show trend lines. So it shows whether or not their sales are going up or down. And then you can get into the legend. So this is the legend here. It automatically puts it where it thinks is best, but you can, of course, adjust. You can do at the top. You can do it on the left side. The auto is usually a good way to go, but it's whatever you'd like to use it as. And of course, again, with the tiny font, you can make it bigger and much easier to read. And you can also bold it or italic, whatever you'd like to do. And then the color adjustment. Horizontal axis, there's not too much that you may want to change on that, other than maybe if you want the text bigger and therefore more legible, and whether or not you want to change the color or slant the text. You can always give a little slanting look there, and that's good for if the titles for your axis are longer and it starts cramping up. You can change the slant angle there. Auto will generally work with what's best and prioritize it, but if you have a preferred amount of slant, you can of course change it there. Vertical axis is handy in that you see how we've got these numbers spread out here, and 8,000 is way out there. We've got all this white space that we could be using for our columns. We can actually change that to 0 and make our maximum, say, 7,000 instead. And now we've got our information spread out a little bit more. It's not so squished. It's a little easier to see. If you were to pick a maximum that cut off the top, then you'd have to click allow bounds to hide data for it to go off of that. For example, let's do 6,000. So you see that chops off the top to there. If you don't do that, then it will still sort of work, but it doesn't quite have the final numbers at the top that you would need. Let's put that back to 7,000. There we go. And then final, and I think fairly important part, is the grid lines. So this is really basic, big spread. It's kind of hard to see the specific numbers. It just gives you a general idea because you're going by thousands. You can change the major spacing. It auto decided to do 1,000, but you could always instead do it by steps versus count. So steps are a value-based spread. So that would be like if I chose 500, you see it changes to 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, so on and so forth. If I were to do count, that breaks it up by a specific number. So the divide here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we could do 8 and see how that breaks up. I guess it counts 8 total. So you see it changes the numbers to match the amount of steps, so the amount of breaks that you have there. We're going to go back to count or to step because that's a little easier to work with, and we're going to go back to our thousands. And then you can have minor spacing, which helps kind of get more specific with the numbers without having actual numbers printed there. If you did, again, steps, you could do, say, 500, and that would put a single line halfway between each so that you know that even though the number's not written there, that's 500, and it gives you a better reference. You can even get into the hundreds, but then that, of course, gets a little more cluttered looking. Any questions about charts?
Does not seem to be.
Okay, there are several other types of charts that you can work with. The most common, of course, depending on the field that you're in, are going to be the bar graph and the column, line charts, and pie charts. They typically work about the same. I'm going to hop back over here real quick. So line charts are the most similar in customization to the bar chart that we were just working with. So let me show you real quick what that looks like. So we're going to do another chart and pick the lines. And you'll notice that this one doesn't have any titles for our legend here. And that's because it didn't use column A as the header. So if you click that, then now it makes a little more sense. 2019 sales versus 2018 sales for Carter. You can see the difference, but when we look at the customization, it's got pretty much the same options that our bar chart and our columns chart had. And we're pretty much out of time. I think we could go over a little if you guys want me to go over pie charts. Are y'all interested in that? Another option is I can also show you how to insert charts into documents. And we can take, say, like 15 minutes to show that off if you guys want to hang around for that.
We're waiting on a little response here, but I'll let you know. Seems we have someone wants you to go over sheet protection again. They can't get theirs to work.
Okay, that's easy enough. Let me get rid of this guy. So, and there's two options. If you're doing the whole sheet, easiest one I find is to just click on the sheet on the bottom here, come to protection, and then can do set permission and the restrictions. And let's see if it behaves itself. So if we end up changing this, yeah, gives you the warning. And when you hit cancel, it undoes. So that's the easiest way to do just a sheet. Once you have the pane up here, you can also do it by range. So if I wanted to, let me undo, Control Z, Control Z, there we go. If we wanted to, say, allow all of this one to be changed, but we didn't want this one to change, we can do the range. So you can highlight the range here, come up to data, protect there, has the range set up. And then again.
Sorry to cut in here real quick.
Yeah.
It seems that one of the persons asking the question is that protect sheet is not on the list of things that comes up whenever that they're looking for that option.
I do not know the answer to that because I've got protect sheet here, so I'm not sure what would be causing that. Are all the others, is all the other stuff on the right click menu the same except for protect sheet?
Yes, seems so.
I have not come across that issue. That might be a Google support question. Because as far as I know, I mean, have they tried, instead of doing the clicking down here, coming up to the data and seeing if there's a protect sheets and ranges option?
Let's check. It is there, but it does not seem to be like yours on the right.
Doesn't come up with the options here. Okay, yeah, that'll definitely be a troubleshooting type situation. This is a good time to plug our Book a Librarian. So if you're having specific issues that you need help with, that maybe like a quick 30-minute session with one-on-one help might do the trick, then I would highly recommend our Book a Librarian option. We can provide one-on-one assistance with technology, doing book references, all sorts of stuff like that. So if you have an issue that you've come across that you need that one-on-one help, I highly recommend it. You can access it from our website under About. And then there's a specific part that says help from a librarian, and we can help you out with specific issues there. Since we've already gone over a little, I'll go ahead and do a quick example of how to insert a chart into a document. So let's say we wanted to put this into a document that we were going to share that highlights the sales for the month that is going to go out as a newsletter for our employees or something like that. We can easily do that by coming over here. We want to switch over to Google Docs because that's where we'll be putting it in. I'm going to just go ahead and pick a blank document here. So if we're going to do that, you go to Insert, and you come down here to Chart, and you can do From Sheets. And it'll show you a lot of options that you have based on what's in your drive. We want to go to the one that we've opened most recently, which is the Google Suites here. Select that, and then it shows you which spreadsheet is available. If you had multiple spreadsheets, you'd be able to see all of those. So you click on that and import. And now we've got our spreadsheet. And you can see bringing it in, the font is a lot bigger, so we'd have to tweak that before we brought it in to work best for the format. But you can make changes as long as it's, you see this little linked icon here, as long as it's linked, you can make changes to the spreadsheet and they will automatically generate in the document. If you've got it exactly as you want it and you don't want any future changes to change it at all, you can come over here and unlink it. And that will mean that any changes you do in the future in the spreadsheet won't impact what's saved into your document. Okay. Any questions about how to do that? It's pretty straightforward. You want to make sure that it does end up in the margins, because if it goes over, it might get chopped off and you wouldn't be able to read it. And as far as adjusting it, it adjusts like any other image in the document. So you have some options of whether or not it's inline, in front of text, behind text, between text, and you can do some adjustments as well. All right, are there any other questions that we can answer in, let's say, the last 4 minutes here before we wrap it up? Or at least try to answer.
Well, I'll let you know. So far, there aren't any other questions.
Okay, now I'm trying to remember back to the question we had that I said I'd see if I could get the answer to. Let's see, bring it back here. Let's see, which one was that?
They were asking if Excel had the exact same function.
Yes, okay, let's pull that up real quick here. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna change my view so that you guys can see it. Okay, let's see if it does. So to equal, what was it? Convert. Yep, yeah, there it is. We've got convert for Excel. Convert, and you can do numbers and units. All righty, so yes, convert is an option in Excel. So that was an easy enough one to answer. I'm sure they have specific unit abbreviations that you'd have to be sure to use. If you had questions on that, you could of course come up here to the function arranger pop-up. I'm not sure what you'd call it, function wizard. There we go, that's the word I'm looking for. And you could get help on the function to get the correct abbreviations you'd need for Excel. All right, any time for, I guess we've got time for maybe one last question.
Doesn't seem to be any questions.
All right, well then we'll wrap it up. If you come up with questions later, of course you can again use the Book a Librarian to get answers that way, or feel free to email me and I can do my best to answer those questions. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And if you have any interest in other topics related to Google Suites or any other technology related questions that you'd like to see covered in programs, do fill out our survey and let us know, because we use that feedback when developing future classes. So we hope to hear from you and get some great ideas for fun and engaging classes in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, and quick reminder, we do have one last class in the series. I almost forgot about that. Slides, which will be covered in 2 weeks. So do join us for that one. It will be a great experience, and we'll actually even see some charts inserted into slides, because presentations are a great way to share information using charts.